couple of seconds while we set this up on YouTube and we begin.
ডক্টর আবুল, আমরা স্টার্ট করি তাহলে?
Yes.
সমৃতা, প্লিজ স্টার্ট। রেকর্ডটা চালু করে যাবেন না?
Hello everyone, Namaskar and welcome to our webinar on research methodology conducted by the Seminar Subcommittee and the Internal Quality Assurance Cell of Maharaja Mohindra Chandra College. Good evening to those who have joined us on our live stream on YouTube as well. We have with us today two distinguished guests, scholars with experience and expertise in their areas of research. Professor Omlan Chakraborty and Dr. Panat Sinha. A few housekeeping notes before we delve into the thick of things. Please keep your microphones muted at all points and your videos turned off. Unless you're speaking, it might otherwise affect our live stream. We will be taking questions at the end of each session. You may put down your questions in the chat box here on Google Meet, or our audience on YouTube can note down their questions, comments, and observations on the live stream chat box. Without further ado, I would like to invite our Honorable Principal, Dr. Monturam Shamunto, to deliver the welcome address.
আমার কথা কি শোনা যাচ্ছে?
Yes, sir.
শুভ সন্ধ্যা। আজকে আমরা যে বিষয়ে ওয়েবিনারের আয়োজন করেছি, আমাদের কলেজের আইকিউএসি এবং সেমিনার সাব কমিটির যৌথ উদ্যোগে আজকের সেমিনারের বিষয়বস্তু রিসার্চ মেথোডোলজি, এবং আগামীকালও একই সময়ে আমাদের আরেকটি ওয়েবিনারের আয়োজন করা হয়েছে, সেটি হলো ইন্টেলেকচুয়াল প্রপার্টি রাইটের উপরে। আজকে যারা পার্টিসিপেশন করেছে সবাইকে অনুরোধ করব আগামীকালও আমাদের এই ওয়েবিনার অনুষ্ঠানে অংশগ্রহণ করার জন্য। আমরা এই বিষয়টা বেছে নিয়েছি, এখন এটা অত্যন্ত গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। সাধারণত আনুষ্ঠানিকভাবে কলেজগুলোতে রিসার্চের বিষয়ে তেমন করে শেখানো হয় না। যেটা শেখানো হয় মাস্টার ডিগ্রি লেভেলে আফটার কমপ্লিশন অফ দ্য গ্র্যাজুয়েশন। কিন্তু এখন যে নতুন এডুকেশন পলিসি আসছে, মানে ন্যাশনাল এডুকেশন পলিসি, দেখবেন সেখানে আমাদের কোর্স হচ্ছে 4 বছরে। আমাদের কোর্স 4 বছরে হচ্ছে, এবং সেখানে শেষ বছরে 4th ইয়ারে রিসার্চের একটা বিষয় থাকছে। যারা 4th ইয়ারে পড়বে তারা রিসার্চের বিষয়ে শেখার একটা সুযোগ পাবে। সুতরাং আন্ডার গ্রাজুয়েট লেভেলও রিসার্চ মেথোডোলজি এখন অত্যন্ত গুরুত্বপূর্ণ হয়ে উঠছে। তাই এই বিষয়টা আলোচনা আমরা এখন থেকে শুরু করতে চাই, যাতে আগামী দিনে আমাদের ছাত্ররা যারা রিসার্চের দিকে যাবে তারা যাতে তার প্রাথমিক শিক্ষাটা, প্রাথমিক বিষয়বস্তুগুলো এখান থেকেই জানতে পারে, সেটা তার ব্যবস্থা করা আমাদের কর্তব্যের মধ্যেই পড়ে। সেই জন্য আমরা এই বিষয়টাকে বেছে নিই। আজকে যে দুজন স্পিকারকে আমরা পেয়েছি, একজন হচ্ছে প্রফেসর অমলান চক্রবর্তী কলকাতা বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ের, আর একজনকে আমরা পেয়েছি প্রফেসর ডক্টর প্রণাত সিনহা, যিনি সংস্কৃত কলেজ এবং ইউনিভার্সিটির সাথে যুক্ত আছেন। তো প্রথমে আমি আমাদের যে দুজন বক্তা আমরা পেয়েছি, আমরা কলেজের পক্ষ থেকে দুজনকে উষ্ণ অভ্যর্থনা জানাচ্ছি, স্বাগত জানাচ্ছি। দেখুন, রিসার্চ বিষয়টা এমন একটা জিনিস যে আমরা আমাদের সাধারণ পঠন পাঠনের পাশাপাশি যদি একাডেমিক বিষয়গুলোকে উন্নত করতে চাই এবং আমাদের আর্থসামাজিক বিষয়কে মাথায় রেখে আমাদের দেশে কি চাই বিভিন্ন বিষয়ে যদি আমাদেরকে অনুসন্ধান করতে হয়, তার জন্য আমরা রিসার্চ বা গবেষণার কাজ করে থাকি। আমরা জানি যে পৃথিবীতে যে দেশ এই গবেষণার কাজে যত বেশি উন্নতি সাধন করতে পেরেছে, সেই দেশ তত উন্নত দেশ হিসেবে পরিগণিত হতে পেরেছে। সেদিক দিয়ে বলা যায় আমাদের বিশাল দেশ ভারতবর্ষ এবং এই মুহূর্তে পৃথিবীর সব থেকে জনবহুল দেশে পরিণত হয়েছে। তো এই দেশে আমরা কিন্তু বিজ্ঞান এবং সমাজ বিজ্ঞানের বিভিন্ন বিষয়ে যা যা গবেষণার কাজ আছে এবং তার ফল যেগুলো আমরা ব্যবহার করি, সেগুলো বেশিরভাগই বিভিন্ন উন্নত দেশে সেই গবেষণাগুলো হয়েছে এবং তার ফল আমরা ব্যবহার করছি। কিন্তু যদি আমরা আমাদের দেশে এই গবেষণা কার্য অনেকটা উন্নত করতে পারি, তাহলে ভবিষ্যতে আমরা উন্নত দেশের পর্যায়ে আমাদের দেশকে নিয়ে যেতে পারবো, এই বিশ্বাস আমরা রাখি। সেই জন্য গবেষণা যে কিভাবে আমরা করব, এখন গবেষণা কি গবেষণা করব, কিভাবে করব, এই বিষয়গুলো জানা কিন্তু খুবই গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। অথচ সাধারণভাবে আমরা আমাদের আন্ডার গ্রাজুয়েট লেভেলে এগুলো ছেলেমেয়েদের শেখাই না। যারা পোস্ট গ্রাজুয়েট লেভেলে এমনকি মাস্টার ডিগ্রি পাশ করার পরে আমাদের দেশে আছে যে রিসার্চ করা, বিশেষ করে পিএইচডির কাজে রিসার্চে অংশগ্রহণ করা এবং বিভিন্ন রিসার্চ পেপার তৈরি করা, সাধারণত তখনই ছেলেমেয়েরা করে থাকে। কিন্তু তার আগেই যদি আমরা কিছু ব্যবস্থা গ্রহণ করতে পারি, প্রাথমিক পাঠ ছেলেমেয়েদের দিয়ে রাখতে পারি, তাহলে আমরা এই কাজও খানিকটা এগিয়ে থাকবো, এই কথা খুব জোর দিয়েই বলা যায়। সেই জন্যই আমরা এই বিষয়টার অবতারণা করেছি। যে দুজন স্পিকার আজকে আমরা পেয়েছি, তাদের বিস্তারিত ক্রিডেন্সিয়াল পরবর্তী ক্ষেত্রে আমাদের যারা অর্গানাইজার তারা তাদের বক্তব্য শুরুর আগে নিশ্চয়ই জানাবেন। আর যারা আজকে অংশগ্রহণ করছেন, বিশেষ করে আমাদের কলেজের শিক্ষক শিক্ষিকা, অধ্যাপক অধ্যাপিকা, আমাদের কলেজের ছাত্রছাত্রীরা এবং আমন্ত্রিত আমি কয়েকজন অন্যান্য অধ্যক্ষ মহাশয়দেরও আমন্ত্রণ পাঠিয়েছি, লিঙ্ক পাঠিয়েছি। তারাও যদি অংশগ্রহণ করে থাকেন, সবাইকে আমি কলেজের পক্ষ থেকে স্বাগত জানাচ্ছি এবং আশা করছি যে আজকের এই ওয়েবিনার অত্যন্ত সফল হবে। আমরা সবাই মন দিয়ে সেই আমাদের দুজন বক্তার কথা শুনবো এবং তারপরে যখন কোশ্চেন আনসার সেশন হবে, সেশনে আমরা স্পেসিফিক কোশ্চেন, যাতে সময় নষ্ট না হয় কিন্তু আমরা গুরুত্বপূর্ণ বিষয়গুলো যেটা আমাদের জিজ্ঞাসা জানতে পারি, সেরকম স্পেসিফিক কোশ্চেন আমরা তৈরি করে রাখবো। তারপর আমাদের অর্গানাইজাররা ঠিক করবেন যে কিভাবে সেই প্রশ্নগুলোর উত্তর আমরা পাবো স্পিকারদের কাছ থেকে, 1 by 1 হতে পারে বা একদম পুরো ওয়েবিনারের শেষে প্রশ্নোত্তর পর্ব হতে পারে। তখন আমরা সেই প্রশ্নগুলোর উত্তর পাওয়ার জন্য স্পেসিফিক প্রশ্ন প্রস্তুত রাখব। এই কথা বলে আমরা দুজন স্পিকারের বক্তব্য শুনবো আজকে, সেজন্য আমরা অপেক্ষা করছি। তাই আমি আমার কথা বাড়াবো না। আবারও আজকের এই ওয়েবিনারে যারা অংশগ্রহণ করেছেন সবাইকে কলেজের পক্ষ থেকে উষ্ণ অভ্যর্থনা এবং স্বাগত জানিয়ে আমার কথা শেষ করছি। ধন্যবাদ।
Thank you so much, sir. I echo his welcome to everybody that's joined us here and also joined our live stream on YouTube. I'm really glad that mentioned about the NEP and the fourth year, which is meant for research for honors students. But even in the current system, in several departments, undergraduate students are expected to write about 10 to 14 term papers. And it is so important for us, therefore, to initiate them into the process of research and talk about research methodology. We had circulated a form around our guests joining us today, and just want to highlight some of the expectations that we have from this webinar, so that Professor Chakraborty, Padada, you're able to sort of, guide the conversation in a proper way. So it looks like our audience is interested in learning more about both qualitative and quantitative research. They also would like some guidance on upcoming research issues and topics in the social sciences, linguistics, and philosophy. We also have a very interesting question, something that I'm still keen on finding out how to prepare for funding for new research and what kind of preparation must one take when trying to send.
Shmita, kindly mute your mic.
Sorry. This happens with online technology. Once in a while, we could be practicing it for 3 years, but there will be glitches. Thank you for bearing with us. Also, one of the other expectations that students and faculty members have is how to prepare for research when approaching a journal for publication. So I'm hoping that our resource persons will be able to throw some light on this. It is my pleasure and privilege to now formally introduce the new to our first speaker today, Professor Amlan Chakraborty, an eminent scholar and director of the A.K. Chaudhary School of Information Technology at the University of Calcutta. Formerly, Professor Chakraborty was the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and Technology. He did his PhD from Calcutta and his postdoctorate research from Princeton University, USA. With 20 years of experience in engineering education and research, Professor Chakraborty has been the recipient of several prestigious fellowships and awards, including the Erasmus Mundus Leaders Award in 2017 and the Shikhar Ratna Award by the Government of West Bengal in 2018. He is a member of several academic committees and also an associate editor of the Elsevier Journal of Computers and Electrical Engineering. We couldn't have asked for a better resource person to talk to us today about research methodology. Delighted to have you with us today, Professor Chakraborty. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor Rumi, and thanks to the principal of the college, Professor Shamanto. Thanks to all my colleagues of Mundaka Chaudhary College, students, and my colleagues and students of other institutes. So what I will speak today will be basically on the research publication, because as we know that research publication is a very important aspect of the outcome of your research and how you propagate your research findings to the community. But it should be a very planned and very well oriented activity. And my lecture today will try to help you or try to assist you, okay, that how you can do better publications and what are the good orientations regarding the research publications. So let me start my presentation and share my screen. So I hope that I am audible to all of you, right?
সবাই মাইক্রোফোনে একটু মিউট রাখুন প্লিজ all the participants are requested to mute their microphone.
So this is my presentation today, right? That means planning and creating a high index research article. I'm not telling that whether it will be a conference or a journal or a book chapter or whatever form, but what we need to have that how we can orient towards writing good research articles, right? As being the series editor of the Springer Transaction in Computer Systems and Network, I'm one of the very few series editors of Springer in India. I am series editor of two Springer, one is Springer Transactions and one is Springer Book, and associate editor of the Elsevier Computer Electrical Engineering. So some amount of understanding with the years I have developed, and I hope that I will be able to carry this out into this lecture. So I start with that why publishing is important, okay? There is a big social cause of publishing, right? And there is also something which that means what is the actual requirement in many of the cases, right? We know that social cause is very blue sky, right? But sometimes the actual reasons are very hard pressed. So So the blue sky concept of research publication articles is that we want to progress in the path of science or social science or technology, and that will ultimately improve our quality of life, right? And through each publication can be a new finding, right? And this new finding can help the society to progress, and that's the way we make contribution to the society, right? And that's the blue sky vision of why we publish. But if we come down to the reality, right, on the ground, okay, we know that why we publish, because we need to show our dominance and advancement in the field, right? I am a professor, I am a researcher in this particular domain, and I want to show the society, the community that I have a lot of advancements and contributions I have done in this field. Publication is very important to get the research funding and grants, right? If you want to write a research paper, a research proposal, right? Your funding agency will try to see that way whether the researcher has a proper support in terms of his or her publication. To get the tenure, this you can tell in terms of our Indian context that we have this course, of joining a particular academic position. Your academic position is being measured in terms of the score what you have in the publications, right? In the case of the other countries, there is called the tenure. And obviously, this publication of an individual researcher, faculty, student ultimately gives an impact on the overall scientific impact of the institute and the individual, and obviously recognition. So I can say that the publication of research articles is the top level process is I'm contributing to the development of the society, but ultimately there can be some sort of very important aspects of your profession why we publish. So when we are trying to publish, right, the first focus is that means how we will plan this. There is a planning for what I believe personally, being a researcher and professional over 20 plus years, right? Whatever you do, it requires a planning and then methodology and then execution of the methodology, right? Which is planning. So what we need to do when we try to publish something, we have to understand that my research or my content of publication is the what is the target audience. Based on the target audience, we try to select a set of journals, or set of books, or set of conferences, right? But obviously we don't go below the recognition or reputation. We have to publish in good recognized journals, books, and conferences. Okay. Now there are two types of publication procedures what the publishers do, right? At the present point of time. One is called open access and one is called subscribed. So open access means that the publisher has a cost in bringing this publication out. Right, and how because nowadays you know that most of the publications, almost all of the publications have a digital archive, but as well as some of the publications also come up with a printed version, the printed physical hard version. So for whatever it is, right, the publisher has to maintain its digital platform, or the publisher has to physically get a printing, physically print the copies of the journal. So both takes certain costs. The question is how the publishers cater this particular cost. So there are two ways. One is called open access and subscribed. Open access is also sometimes called as the gold option, right, in some of the publishers. So open access means that the publisher offers it free, most of the digital platform offers it free in the digital platform, so anyone can go to the digital link of the journal and can get the research document. There is no fee for accessing. So how the publisher gets the value? The publisher gets the value by charging the author an open access fee. So the author pays the publisher an open access fee, and that fee supports the dissemination of this publication, of the publication of the open access mode so that anybody can access it. The other mode is the subscribed version. Subscribed version means this particular journal or this particular document, research document, will be only available to those users who have subscribed. There is a license or payment against the subscription, and that can be a personal subscription, that can be an institutional level subscription. And so if your institute subscribes a particular journal or a particular book version or a particular conference proceedings, by paying the fees to the publisher, then you get it. So there are the two ways, and these two ways can be also be selected when you are trying to submit your journal, or when your journal accepts your paper. What is the mode of publishing you want? Now there is a notion that the open access, where the researcher pays a fees for publication, these are not good. These are not good journals. Now this notion we have to drop. This is not the right notion. So the publication depends on that which publisher is publishing my journal. Right? There are predator publishers. One of my professors used to say that the predator publishers will actually publish your paper once you pay the fees without doing any review. Right? So the fee payment is the actual motivation of getting the journal, but those are predator publishers. Right? But there are top publishers who also go for open access, right? Because they want to have a more viewership of the journal, right? And many of the top publishers, right, in technology domain or science domain, I know IEEE, SCM, Elsevier, Springer, right? All these top journals have their open access also. So don't get feared about open access. Actually, in Europe or in many countries, right? I am a reviewer of many of the grant proposals abroad. They have an open access fee in the grant proposal, right? And these open access basically leads to open science, right? And the mandate is that if you are trying to publish with the public money, right? Then every public should have an access to your research, to your research. So what you do, you support the publication open access charge from your research grant, and then any public, the public can have a free access to that. But in India, obviously, I understand that this is the grants doesn't include still open access. They have some sort of contingency by which we can support partially, but might not be all. But this is a sort of motivation which is also coming up, because open access of good publishers gives you a good scope of viewership and the right understanding. Okay. So next part is the impact factor of the journal. That means you should. I will come to the impact factor, how it is estimated very soon. But you should actually look into the journals, which is a good impact factor. Right. Probability of acceptance is a dicey situation, right? That means you should that means it depends on your confidence on the paper. Right. There are, if you look into the journal search options, but many of the publishers offers, like IEEE, Elsevier, SCM, Springer, basically on the science and technology domain, right? You will see that all the journals come from the probability of acceptance. But that is your choice, right? That means if you feel that, that means I will try to push it to a very, very strong journal, right, to go ahead and do it, right? And the strongest journals have a very low acceptance rate. The acceptance rate will go down below 20%. Okay. Right. Publication time is also a thing that is how fast the editorial board works. So obviously our motivation should be that once I submit the paper, the review should be done within 4 to 6 weeks, and the publication will be done within 10 weeks. This is a very standard 9 to 10 weeks. This is a very standard process, but we know that many of the times, right, due to the scarcity of time of the reviewers, right, our reviews gets extended, and our publication time gets extended, but we don't have any handle on that, because we are submitting research papers and then it goes to the interview board, right, who takes the decision of the review time and right at the publication schedule. So we have to work with that only. Okay. Now, when we try to focus that means what we need to publish, right? Obviously, there is a pressure of publication, right? The students who are doing the PhD and now as principals rightly said that if you go to the 4 years program, right, of the 4 years undergraduate program, there is a strong sense of doing the research, and obviously there will be some credits will be given if you can publish your work also. So now when you need to publish, right? Obviously you see the right hand side of this particular balance, right, is the heavy, right? So you need to publish when you fulfill this particular, on the right hand side, the points on the right hand side means you have come up with the original results and methods. You have done a significant enhancement from the state of the art research or from the work which is already published, right? And the impact of your research. This is also very important, right? When you try to do research, there are two things you need to keep in mind. One is the contribution in the research, which means that what is the originality, that is how much is the enhancement in the domain you have done. This is the in total the contribution. But the other is the impact. So the research problem what you have chosen, whether it is very relevant in the present society, whether this problem is a critical problem in the society, or it is a problem which nobody thinks about, because this is a very not so prominent in our society now. So you have to look into these three aspects. If these three aspects are good, then obviously you are ready. That means your work is ready, and you should submit your research paper. Whereas if you see in the other side of this, right, the outdated work. Right, that means you have done a lot of work. Because sometimes students come to me and say, "Sir, I have worked for this amount of days, but when I go through the work, I see that this has already been done. So this work is an outdated work. There is no point in getting this published." Right. Your conclusions are very fuzzy. That means you don't clearly tell that what progress you have actually done in the domain, right? In the conclusion or with the results, you have to prove that you have done some improvement, either in terms of performance, right, or in terms of cost in solving the problem, right? And you shouldn't duplicate the published work, right? We know that in every corner of the art, right, in every corner of the work, there is some research going on. Right, and you might feel that that means I will just do the same thing and try to get it published in a different journal. Right, with this group was published in X journal and try to do a little bit modification and try to do it, but this is not a good practice. Okay, try to publish original work. Don't publish duplication of the work. Okay, so these are the very thumb rule what you need to look into when you try to publish. Now, what makes a strong manuscript? What makes a research manuscript strong? It should be clear. It should be crystal clear. My postdoc researcher at Princeton, Professor Neeraj Jha, used to tell that, look, Amlan, what you need to actually same for my supervisor at Indian Statistical Institute, Professor Srishmita Shikole, right? Both of them used to say me when I learned research from them, right? Two of my very prominent researchers. Right, senior stalwarts in the domain of research. So they used to tell me that, look, Amlan, that you can do a little work, right? The quanta of work is not so important. But what you need to do is that means what is the depth of the work you have done. That means how much how clearly you have shown the progress in your work. It should be useful. It should have an impact, and it should pass an exciting message. That means you have really done a real contribution. So people get excited when something new comes up. People are not excited when something people know, right? You have again done that same work. So the excitement in the scientific community comes that when you have done something new. So it should be clear. It shouldn't be ambiguous. It shouldn't be fuzzy, right? It should be useful. It should have enough impact in the present society, and it should be exciting because you have done something new. Right, and it should be constructed in a logical manner. It shouldn't be a jumble or jugglery of the things. It should have a very good progress across the research writing. Right. That means how you plan the research, how you studied the existing work. What is the research gap you have found out? What are the methodologies you have done? What are the uniqueness in the methodology, right? And then how you have planned your experiments. What are the results you have done, and how you can show the performance of your methodology to the results, and how your performance is comparable with the related research work. Okay, that is the significance of your work. Okay. Now, editor, reviewers, readers all look these things in your paper. Okay, because editors has the strongest responsibility that every paper which comes out in his or her journal, right, should be an useful research. Okay, that is the main focus of the editor. Because otherwise his journal value will go down. Right, and the editor will have a very low reputation, come up with a very low reputation, right? And reviewers is to support the vision of the journal and the editorial team. So the reviewers, which are appointed by the editorial board, right, have the responsibility to support this. So they will also go in the same line, right? And why editorial board or reviewers are doing this? Because they need to attract readers on the published work on this particular journal. So this is the view what your editors, reviewers, and readers expect, and you should support this. Okay. There are different types of articles. We know that full articles, which is extensive research work, right, which actually comes with a very good problem formulation, extensive methodology, right, extensive experiments, and try to prove the goodness of your work by a lot of analysis. But there are also something called letters or short communications, which in some of the journals or some of the publishers have this. It is not that all the publishers have the letter or short communications. Right? What is this? This is a very novel thing which has come up, which you have come up with, right? And this particular results or this particular methodology is not very extensively done. But you have found there is a great promise, and you try to publish it quickly so that the research community knows about this new thing. Okay, so these are called very thrilling type of research, right, which is not still experimented over a very large number of experiments, right. You can still do with a letter or short communication, right. And review papers are the most difficult papers to write, right, because these type of papers you can only write when you have a full confidence in the domain where you are doing the research, and you have enough experience to analyze that means a good number of research works. So research paper is something which analyzes a good number of research works. Okay, mostly the top research works in this domain over a period of time, maybe 10 years or 15 years, right? And you should have that level of understanding so that you can have a view, right? Have a critic's view on all these research works, and how it helps to the next researcher. So the next researcher can individually go to each of the articles, right? But if there is a good review, the researcher's work is very easy, and the new researcher's work is very easy. He or she will go with the review work of a very experienced researcher in this domain and try to grasp the field fast by understanding the analytical and critical comment of a good set of research works in this domain, right? And the new researcher can learn first. So you see the review research papers have a great citation. People will read this very thoroughly because this gives the very fundamental understanding of the domain, by reading one good research, one good review paper. Okay. Now I will skip this. So I just ask them how much time is required, how much time is remaining to the organizers. If you can tell me, I will just space my presentation accordingly.
Sir, you have 10 more minutes left.
10 more minutes. Okay, fine. So let me speed up a bit because this is a 1.5 hour lecture what I give in our research methodology course. Let me skip it a bit, right? And let me go into some of the interesting things. Okay, this is one of the interesting things. I want to see that. Okay, when we look into this journals, right? The most dominating fact is that high impact factor, right? Your supervisor will tell, your peer will tell that, hey, whether you have done a high impact factor journal. So how will this impact factor get calculated or get estimated? It's basically the citation. Citation means the other researchers have referred your work. Each reference is a sort of citation. Right, and if your work is very well referred, your citation count gets increased, right, and that actually is good, right. Now the high impact factor journals, the high impact factor and the impact factor is estimated to the citations, okay, right, and there is a list of, in fact, this is basically for the science journals, okay. Again, I primarily do research on science and technology, so I think this, but similar things will be available in the social science also, humanities also. Okay. So there are some standard links or standard repositories where you can get this particular list of the journals, okay, of the categories, and this is called a scientific index, okay. SI. I will just go that how this impact factor is estimated. So it is a journal citation report, which is basically Science Citation Index. Okay, it's called SCI. So the SCI, which is a very popular term in publication for the journals. In case of science and technology, the Science Citation Index, right, and how we calculate the impact factor. It is something like this: that if you are trying to do an impact factor in the year 2021, it's basically citations in 2021 to articles published in 2019 and 2020. So when you are trying to calculate the impact factor in 2021, you go to the previous 2 years, okay, and this is for a journal. This is for a journal, okay. So you accumulate the citations of the journals for the past 2 years divided by the articles published in these journals over the last 2 years. Okay, and that you get, and so you are very sure that if your citation count is pretty high compared to the number of journals, I mean, each journal gets more and more cited, then your citation count will be some X factor of the total number of articles published. Okay, and that is the impact factor of that particular journal. So if a journal gets a low citation, its impact factor goes down, and that's why you see that the impact factor is not constant over the years. With year it changes. The same journal which has a impact factor of maybe 3.5, right, in 2021, in 2023 it may be 4.5, or it may go down to 2.8. Okay. It all depends on the citation of the past 2 years and the number of articles published in the past 2 years. Okay. And there, that if you look into the standard sites as in SCI index, right, you can find all the citations, all the impact factor of the journals. Okay. Right. And then there is an H index, which is for the researcher. Okay, this is also now for some of the conferences also it comes up. But let us focus mostly on the researchers or scientists. They have their H index. It's called H index. How it is calculated? It is calculated by by estimation like this. So if I tell that my H index is 25, what does it mean? So it means that at least 25 of my research publications have a citation of 25 or more. So it's N versus N. So the first H papers having H citations is your H index. Okay. So ideally, I'm telling this very simple that the total number of papers N in the list that have N or more citations, then N is your H index. So if your H index, again I'm coming back, if your H index is 25, if your H index is 55, it means that 55 papers of this researcher has a citation of 55 or more. Okay, it's very clear, I think, to all of you. Okay, how important are my citations? This is a little bit debatable, but I'm going in a positive sense, right? Because many of the traditional researchers still feel, right? And I am also in some way think the same, that might be citation is not the measure of the quality of the research article. Okay. I'm not getting into this debate now, but we can host this debate, right? Maybe in the Mohindra College, or maybe University of Calcutta, or in any institute, right from here, that whether citation is the proper measure of the research contribution of a research article or of a researcher. But in a very straight line way, obviously, if we publish in good journals, as they have a high impact factor, your citation count will enhance. And that's why you see the last phase is very smiling, because I am published in a good journal and I'm getting a lot of citations. So the thumb rule is that if you publish in good journals, the high impact factor journals, you will get good citations. Okay. Now this is a good picture that means how you can place your paper, your research in high impact journals or research publications. It is the concept, right? The concept you place. So falling open. Falling of an apple, right, generates the law of gravity. So you go to the deep of the root of this cause, and you're trying to find that what has happened, and try to formulate it, and try to analyze it, and then come up with a research outcome. Right? This is a high impact factor paper, right? Low impact factor paper. So the difference between this is the low impact factor paper means this will not generate most probably good citations. So what you have said here is that you have only said an activity. Right? You haven't said what is the root cause. What is the problem this activity is solving? But how this activity progresses the scientific thought process. You have only said an activity. You have only said that I have done this, and this is the result, and this is my research work. So it doesn't lead to a good sort of contribution, right? And it will be low impact. Vis-a-vis, if you tell that this was my problem, and this problem originated due to this issue, right? And we have solved the problem, and this solution leads to this outcome, right? And I validate the solution with experiments, and I prove the goodness of the solution. Yes, this will be a good impact factor paper. Good impact paper. Okay. Now I will go to the. I will go one slide here. So when to draft a manuscript? Best practice is that when you are doing an experiment and you're planning the experiment, try to capture the result, try to prepare the figures, right, and try to draft your procedure, draft your findings, right. The other good practice is that hey, you go to a seminar, you go to a conference, present the paper, right? That means or in a meeting, sorry, not in a conference, in a meeting, in a group meeting, you present your work, and people give you some comments that okay, you have to do this work doesn't work, this is the way you have to modify this work, you do a little bit this in the stretch your experiment a bit, right? With all these inputs, you are sufficient to actually try to find that what will be how you will place your paper and how you start the writing. Okay. The script of the seminar is obviously you can also use other draft. But the worst practice is that you completed all the experiment, you finished all the things, and then you start writing. Because that what will happen, you might miss some of the important facts, okay, which you have understood or which you have carried out during your methodology and during your experiments. And you cannot do this when you are out of this entire laboratory environment, and then you are sitting somewhere else and you are starting writing the paper. So this is not a good practice. Okay. Just go to this slide. So there are four major sections of your paper. Introduction. You have to motivate the researchers that why you did this research. Okay. What is this research? What is this research all about? Why this research is interesting? Okay. What are the domains this research can open up? Methods. What you have actually done, and you have to highlight what new things you have practiced. Right? This is the most important, because in your methodology there may be something which are already known to us. Okay, that you also have to report. But you need to highlight more on the methods, on the techniques, what you have evolved, what you have done newly. And results is very important, right? You need to be very ethical in your results. This is very important part. I don't know if that means this is not covered due to the time, but results is very important. Okay. Many of the people, okay, there are two things you do with results which are wrong practice. Okay. You try to generate results which always makes your research problem in a favor, gives the research problem a favor, and that you may do with some sort of perturbations of the actual results. This is unethical. Right? You try to show that all your results are very good. All the experiments on your methodology, on the problem domain have come out excellently. Okay, now just to impress, but this is not good. You should be ethically honest. Right? Because people will, why? Because people will again reproduce your experiments. Right? And if your results are not actual results, then people will report it to your journal, basically for the science and technology, I'm telling this. And obviously this can be also in social science also, because social science also does experiments in other way, but the way it is done is more or less same. So you try to tell that, hey, this part of my methodology doesn't work good for this part of the problem. Okay, for these constraints of the problem. Whereas you should be very transparent. Whereas my methodology works good when this is the scenario. So you show both the scenarios where your methodology doesn't perform so well and your methodology performs well, because in applications or in a thought process you might not require all the things in one bucket. There may be separate buckets. So in some buckets your methodology is really good, but in some buckets your methodology are not so good, and that you have to present. That is also a part of the research. Research is not only that your methodology is very successful. Research is also that where your methodology is not very successful, where your methodology is successful, and where your methodology is very successful. Right? So all these scenarios you have to mention in your research and try to be ethical. Okay. And what does that mean? So results you don't only show plots and graphs and then the reviewer or then your readers will understand it automatically. No, you try to explain everything what you have shown in the results. Right? With a suitable way of analytical view. Okay. Now I will just move here. So. I will just move here. So submitting your paper, revise, and revise. This is very important, right? Nowadays, many of the young researchers, just try to say that, oh, I have done hard work in doing experiment, right? And now I will just throw it to the journal editorial board or reviewer, right, or to my supervisor, and then he or she will help me, or editorial will help me, right? It is not a good practice. Because the thing is that you are the best person to write what you have done in your research. If your writing is not good, if you haven't given time to your writing, what happens is that your research is not well conveyed, and due to this, you're not conveying of the research in a good way. Your research may get dropped. Okay, you may get rejection. Okay. So this is the best practice is that you try to be your own reviewer, right? And try to revise your paper. Okay. So I'm just skipping it. Don't become too much verbose. Nowadays there is a risk that many of the being in editorial committee, many of the times the papers comes to us when it is verbose, and nowadays in the age of ChatGPT, right, that means the automated generation of text tools, right, you have to be very clear that first of all you have to give a declaration that which is not being generated. Nowadays every journal is coming that you have to give a declaration that it is not generated by the automated tools. Secondly, you don't be very verbose, because verbose means that you are not direct in science, or you are not direct in your research, right? You are just trying to trying to just stretch in terms of the words, which is not liked by many of the reviewers. Okay, try to be, don't use jargon. Try to speak very clearly. Okay. And these are all the things I will just try to go the peer reviewer process. Okay. This is a little bit very strong message, right? But you think like this. That is actually my postdoc. Okay, the researcher said, the supervisor said that when I submitted a paper for his review, he said that Amlan, when I review a paper, first I come up with the concept that everything written is wrong. Everything written in this paper is wrong. Then I read this paper and try to see that how the paper has proved that it is not wrong. So the reviewer will take your paper that whatever the researcher has submitted is that entirely there are a lot of mistakes and a lot of wrong things are being done. So now your responsibility is such that you overcome all these filters of your reviewers, right, who are putting strong filters, right, and you're taking your paper as that your research is not a good research, and then you have to prove to the reviewer that yes, no, my research is very good. Okay, so that is the way you should visualize your reviewers and try to block every loopholes, every loose work in your research, and try to make it as tight as possible, as clear as possible, as analytical as possible, right, as best as possible. Okay, I will just try to use the process. So what are reviewers are looking for, right? Sometimes our problem is pretty novel. Sometimes the students comes that, sir, we defined a very good problem, but we got rejection. Why? And sometimes the technical aspect of the experimentation and the methodology is very good, but still the paper got rejected. Why? Because there are two aspects of a paper. One is the novelty. What is the impact of this paper in the scientific community? Okay, how novel it is, how much it progresses the actually research means what? Research means progression in the knowledge space. Okay. But that's why it's called a research. Okay. So now how much it has improved the knowledge space? That is a novelty. Right? How much new knowledge it has churned out. Okay. The other part is that it's a new knowledge, but the way it has been presented, the way the experiments have been done, the way the methodology is presented is very shabby. It's technically very shabby. It's a very loose and casual war. Many a times we have to just give in the response that this is a very casual research. So the problem is very novel because the researchers haven't improved the way of presenting the research or the way of presenting the methodology, proper steps in the methodology, proper procedure of experimentation. And that's why it fails. Okay. I will just go to the last part. Okay, this is also ethical part. You can have several authors in the paper, first author, co-authors, corresponding authors. Perfect. All are good contributors, but be ethical. Don't have ghost authors. Okay. Ghost authors means the authors whom you have left out, who have actually contributed. Their name doesn't come. They have helped you. They have helped you in some process, in the concept development, in the methodology development, in the problem formulation, methodology development, experimentation. Okay, you have some people whom you have left out, maybe intentionally or maybe unintentionally. But you should try to think that who should be author list. Okay, you have to be judicious on thinking on the who's author list. And there are gift authors. Authors who didn't do anything in the paper. Right? That means many of the times I don't want to know that there are big bosses, there are people above your level. Right. That means whom you want to incorporate just for that, giving the sake in the giving their name in the paper. Now this is unethical. Don't do that. Your author list should be very proper. The contributors, all the contributors who have contributed. So I think that I'm fine. I'm just You have to nowadays you have to go for plagiarism. Duplicate manuscripts, unnecessary self-citation, redundant publication, conflict of interest. You don't actually submit in a journal. Write that means in a where that means you don't submit where the reviewers are your very good friends. Okay, this type of thing shouldn't happen. Okay, animal ethics, human ethics should be done. Okay. So I think I am fine. I'm just keeping it a bit. In summary, I'm just coming to the last slide. Summary. Novel idea is a very good statement. Okay, for a good research publication. Quality of the science and research what you have done. Those scientists are not born writers, but we have to learn this skill. Because if you cannot present your research, your research will not be popularized, and your research will not get into the society. So slowly, from a good scientist or from a good researcher, you have to be also a good writer, right? Writing research documents, and you should look into publishing. Okay, it might not be high impact journal, or it should be publishing in good. That means in good publish. Okay, write for good books, good journals, good conferences, which are organized by good publishers or good research groups. Okay, and that's all from my side. If you have any questions, I have reduced my lecture a bit due to the paucity of time, but I think that I have at least touched the points. Okay. So there are some questions I think I've already received.
So much, Professor Chakraborty. We wish we could hear you speak on probably when we open we have a longer in-person seminar one here. We do have a few questions. This is an invitation to everybody. Please put your questions in the chat box here on or on our YouTube chat box.
Answer this question. There is a question from Naina there. How do you monitor abuses of ghost authors and gift authors? Okay. So a very smart editorial board can actually do that, because they try to see that from which lab it is generated. But it is very difficult. From the review, many of the times it's the ethical commitment of the researchers who have submitted the paper, right? And this is an ethical commitment which every researcher should be there. Okay. One question from Otoshi. Yes, Otoshi. What do you suggest the basic steps for good publication? Okay. Basic steps for good publication is that right. Try to come up with a novel and an impactful research. If your research is novel, and if it really really solves the problem of the society. See, there are many problems, right? There are that you can obviously formulate problems of the society, that means which are very related to the society, or maybe unrelated to the society. So many of the times, as the number of submissions are huge, right? Reviewers try to focus on those which are very which have high impact on the society, and some of the journals specifically mention that in their call for submission that research those research works which have a very good impact for the societal problems, they are more taken care. So you need to focus there. What is the impact of the problem? Be it theoretical also, be it experimental also, but it should actually solve an impactful problem. Okay. Yeah. Any more questions? The one raised hand, I think. Shashwati. You can ask your question.
Please put in the chat box for us.
Yeah.
While we wait for that, Professor Chakraborty, I have a question on something that you touched on.
Sure.
I love the phrase that you used about predatory publishers. We've been calling them alternative culture publishing or vanity publishing. While directly related with circular I think the current system of API/CAS promotes this culture of predatory publishing and is kind of way out of.
Ramesh, I cannot say officially, but if you think personally, I'm not a believer of API at all. Right? I'm not a believer of API at all because a good selection committee can always interact with the faculty or researcher and can always try to find out that what is the depth of effect. See, one good paper. See, Einstein has written one good paper. Right, and that is phenomenal. So it is not the count in research. It is more because nowadays what is happening, right? People are publishing 10, 12 good publications in a year. Many of the good researchers. I'm not criticizing them. But the basic issue is that how you can do 10, 12 phenomenal work in a year. That is not possible, right? Actually, if you publish one good paper in a year, right? I think it is pretty good. But why we do that? We have plans. Okay, our API score, right? Our PhD students, they require journal papers to submit their thesis on time. So these are all the factors, right? Actually, I was in Oxford. I was in Cambridge in 2018 as a visiting professor. In Cambridge, there is a standard say. Don't hide your thesis behind your papers. So your thesis nowadays we actually tag. Okay, that means two good journal papers. Okay, as students. So now what happens now is that don't quote me. It's not a public statement, but just an informal statement that a student comes with 2 publications and says, "Okay, professor, I am done. Can I now complete my thesis?" So this is the after effect of when you make a mandate. So these have a lot of controversies, but obviously again why API is done because India is a big country. There are a lot of institutes, a lot of faculty requirements. You cannot give such a time in interaction with the faculty. So you come up with some sort of pre-study of the faculty with a quantitative score, and then you sit for the interview, and then the interview process can work first. So these are the reasons that why we come in API score, but in a very ideal situation, I think the research interaction with the researcher is the best thing to understand that what is the depth of research or what is the orientation of researcher has, and there is no other yardstick. If you hear one lecture from a top researcher, right, he will see your food for thought for the next few years are done. And that is the phenomenal researcher. There are phenomenal researchers in India, phenomenal researchers in Kolkata, phenomenal researchers across the world. I have the opportunity to meet a few of them. So when I can still remember a lecture which was given 20 years ago. Okay, I still remember a lecture which Professor C.A. Murthy gave us in our MTech class in radio physics electronics, a lecture right on fractal. Right, and it was phenomenal, Professor C.A. Murthy's lecture. I still can remember that what he lectured in that particular class. And similarly, Professor Shankar Pal gave a lecture in our MTech class on fuzzy. Right, and it was also a phenomenal lecture. So these lectures are something which we can still remember, because that was the we don't look into citation of Professor Shankar Pal that time or C.A. Murthy that time. We just listen to them, and that's what is a researcher. But we cannot do with the time. We cannot go in this type of assessments, and that's why all these quantitative measures comes, which have their which comes with their own fault. Okay, yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Chakraborty. I echo your thoughts informally, of course. If there are no further questions, I do think there is one more question in the chat box. We will take this.
I think Shashwati wants to say something. Shashwati?
Okay, Shashwati, please come up.
Please come up.
Good evening. Just fast, which do not have immediate impact on the society. So what is view about?
Yes. So when you write the impact, right, you have to. It is not the immediate. See, I started quantum computing in 2005 in ISI. Right. Nobody thought of quantum computing at that point of time. Right. And now quantum computing is a very successful story. Right. So it is not immediate, but you have to show that what is the impact. It can be 2 years, it can be 3 years, it can be 5 years, it can be 10 years. But you show that, see, when I researched quantum computing, I showed that quantum computing can give a phenomenal paradigm shift in computing. Right? And paradigm of computing is very important. Though due to the limitation of hardware resource and system resource, quantum computing was only simulation when I was in research, when I was doing PhD, came into a little bit practical during my postdoc, and now it is very practical. So what you have to show is that the impact in your domain. Right, the impact may come, the actual results may come 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years, 8 years. Same the string theory. Same the string theory have still very less. But if we absorb the string theory, what phenomenon changes it can do, that is enormous. So that you have to show as an impact in your research.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, so one question I will just take. Anuti. Okay. So original addition to our field of interest. Okay, this is very important. So how you do that? You have to do a very good study of the prior research work. Okay. Highly cited papers from good journals, conferences. You have to know your domain. You have to know what are the good journals and conferences. Try to take those. Try to do a summary. Do a research gap, speak with some of the experts, because your supervisor should be one of the experts. There may be other experts in the domain. Try to have a discussion with them, sir, what are the problems you feel? And then you try to find out that what are the problems you have in this domain, and try to take one problem and progress. And obviously that will be something novel you are taking.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I would love to move on to a very last interesting question. And this very last question, I would request you to reserve your question.
Journal. Read that articles have a low impact factor. Journal content gets copied, and that's why they delay in the decision. No, I am not in that sense. Right? I will not say in this way. Low impact journal. There are 2, 3 things. What is the journal is new? First of all. The journal is in a very niche domain, which is a big domain, but not many researchers are working in this domain. So the works are not getting highly cited, right? or there is some sort of penetration is not there. It is a journal with a particular very focused group, so it is not spreading up, and it is not that it get copied, and those are the unethical things. See, unethical things can happen any point of time, and this is very difficult to control. But if you leave unethical things, that means so whenever there is a rejection in my group, my student comes with lot of strong words that this was the reviewer, this was the group rejected our works, this is due to this is, but don't take it in that way. Right? This is a part of your life, a researcher, right? A very top researcher can have a rejection. So try to take this sportively, try to think positive sense, because if we try to think the things negatively, then that will actually take our minds, and we cannot progress in the research. So be positive and try to take in a sporting spirit all the rejections.
Samrita, now is the right time to invite the second speaker. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Chakraborty, for your valuable thought-provoking speech. Specifically beneficial to the researchers and the teachers. Thank you for your
With your kind permission, if I can leave, sir.
Now, Samrita,
With your kind permission.
invite the second speaker.
Yes.
Let me thank one second, Shumita. Sir, since you're leaving, I would like to extend my heartiest thanks to you for your precious time and your insightful knowledge of the topic. We will be able to encourage our students to pursue research in the future. Okay, thank you.
Sure, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now from a man of sciences, we will move on to a man of social sciences. I would like to invite my colleague, Dr. Mitali Dasgupta, to formally introduce our next speaker, Dr. Konad Sinha.
Very good evening to all of you. Thank you, Professor Ramdan Chakraborty, for your wonderful lecture. It was indeed very useful to us. I would now like to introduce Dr. Sinha. Dr. Sinha teaches ancient Indian and world history in the Department of Ancient Indian and World History, the Sanskrit College and University of Kolkata. He has done his masters and PhD from the Center for Historical Studies, GNU. His primary field of research is social, cultural, and intellectual history of early India, especially early Indian historical traditions. He is a regular commentator in the Anandwachar Patrika in contemporary issues. His monograph from Dasarachna to Kurukshetra, making historical tradition, has received the Karwan Book Prize 2022. Dr. Sinha, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and good evening to everyone here. I thank the college for thinking of me for presenting something on research methodology. Now already we have heard a very erudite and detailed lecture, particularly very useful for those who are trying to learn the tricks of getting good publications. And as Urni has already mentioned that this was a speech from a man of science. Now, when we are shifting our attention to the domains of humanities and social sciences, now there are some very basic differences also. If we look at the publications in humanities and social sciences and publications in what we know as natural science, for instance, in the previous discussion, we have seen that the focus was on journal publication. And journal publication is of course one of the most important fields of research publication in any domain, because that is the place where you are getting peer reviewed, your academic reputation is being built. But in the case of natural sciences, it is primarily the most reputed journals whose publications are where you are going to get your academic reputation. Because the researches of natural sciences are not always matters of public interest. Their outcome may be a matter of public interest, but not the nitty-gritties or how the argument is being developed. That is something which is mainly for the readership of the specialists in the field. But in case of humanities and social sciences, we deal with human conditions, how the human society works, various aspects of human life. Very often, the sources are primarily which are produced by the authors, the artists, who are also reflecting on the society they are working on. So the research outcomes of the scholars of humanities and social sciences also are often a matter of public interest. If we look at the top scientists around us, very few of them are read by the common people. Of course, there are books written by great scientists. Either they are path-breaking books which are relevant for everyone, like Darwin's Origin of Species, which is being removed from the curriculum in various countries, including ours. And of course, Origin of Species was not part of the curriculum of school syllabus. That is the argument which Darwin develops there. But mostly the top scientists don't write books, except the ones who are writing popular science, like Carl Sagan, like Stephen Hawking, who are also trying to cater to a popular reader. Whereas in case of humanities and social sciences, be it literature or history or philosophy, the authors try to cater to the public domain. So when we publish our works, we send our articles to the journals. That is one aspect. But when you are doing an MPhil, MPhil is now more or less scrapped. But when you are doing a PhD, a postdoc, something, there is something at the back of your mind about how to turn this into a book. And that is also another domain which we should consider while thinking of publication. So, of course, the points which Professor Ramlan Bhattacharya has raised are very important when you are selecting journals, when you are trying to get as much citations as possible. But in case of humanities and social sciences, you are going to get more readership if you can come up with very good books, which can be a collection of your articles or can be a monograph on a single topic. But the books give you a much larger readership, and that would improve your citation also as a result of that. Because the more well-known you are as an author, people would be interested to search the writings online and find them, and your writings would get more readers. So that is another aspect of research in humanities and social science. The issue of readability. It is not only about how the research would be received by the reviewer or by the specialist, but how do we communicate with the public in general, whether we can transmit our ideas to the public. And what I'm going to talk on today, because my own field of research is history, so I will try to connect the general research in humanities and social sciences with the aspect of thinking historically. And why is it important to think historically? What I'm saying about thinking historically is not relevant only for the researchers in history, but in any social science, because whatever you are working on, like for instance some student of literature, someone is maybe working on Victorian novels. So you have to have an idea about the historical context of the Victorian period. Otherwise, you cannot put the literature in its context. So texts are a very major domain of social science research, and of course, what we understand by text is now expanding. So by text, I am not meaning only written texts, but there can be various kinds of texts and subtexts. But as long as we don't put them into context, the quality of the research falls. And to put any kind of text, any kind of material in its social context, which is the major intention of social science research, we have to have some idea about how to think historically, how to understand the historical context which is producing some text. So history as a discipline, like the information which the discipline of history is providing you with, that may not be relevant in its totality for everyone, but at least the idea, the methodology of thinking historically is something very important when we deal with social science research. So I shall speak a bit on the evolution of this methodology and where this methodology stands now. In course of this discussion, I shall raise certain points, of course, which are relevant about thinking about how to write a good research article or a book in social science or humanities as well. So we are using these two terms, humanities and social sciences, often interchangeably, sometimes with some kind of distinction. So if we go back to the history of these terms, primarily I'm starting with the idea of humanities, because the idea of humanities is much older than the idea of social sciences. And these academic disciplines, the way we are approaching academics now, going to schools, colleges, and universities, earning degrees, writing articles, getting published, scoring API scores, and everything. This kind of paraphernalia which is there, the institutional system of education, which we call the modern educational system, as we are calling it modern, so it is connected with this idea called modern. And this modernity is a concept which is born in Western Europe. And in Western Europe, modernity did not come in a single day. It is considered the outcome of a long process rather than a particular moment. So this shift from the previous epoch in human history, which is Western European history, in the standard idea of Western European history, is the shift from medieval to modern. And this shift takes place through certain intellectual movements. The first of these intellectual movements is known as the Renaissance, and the last major one is known as the Enlightenment. So the Renaissance is taking place in the 13th, 14th centuries, and the Enlightenment is happening at the end of the 18th century. So this long period between 13th to 18th century is the time when medieval is disappearing and what we know as modernity is coming. It is culminating in the Enlightenment, but the Renaissance is the beginning. And what happened during Renaissance? Before the Renaissance, in the medieval period, knowledge system was mainly the domain of religion. Not only in Europe, in various parts of the world, the major educational institutions, of course, education was there, academics was there, research was there, but they were under the overarching guiding force of religion. So we know in ancient India, the great educational institutions we hear of, the Taksila, Nalanda, Vikramshila, these are actually, though we popularly call them universities, they are not universities. They are called Mahaviharas. Viharas are Buddhist monasteries. They are Buddhist monasteries. Similarly, there were the various places of Sanskritic learning, where Brahmanical knowledge system was functioning. In the Islamic world, there was a different kind of knowledge system, and there were great educational institutions in the Islamic world in the medieval period. Similarly, in Western Europe, knowledge was mainly controlled by the church, and the Bible was considered the guiding force of all knowledge, the source of all knowledge. Now, during the Renaissance, as the movement is called Renaissance, which means regeneration, rebirth. So rebirth of what? The rebirth of classical Greek and Roman culture, Greek and Roman learning, resources of ancient Greece and Rome, which were being rediscovered. So this rediscovery indicated that there is a pre-Christian element in European civilization. So all knowledge must not necessarily be controlled by the church, because even before the church existed, there was a rich body of knowledge in ancient Greece and Rome. And this rich body of knowledge, though there was some kind of religion in ancient Greece and Rome as well, their knowledge system, their philosophy was not governed by the religion. This was what we can call a kind of anthropocentric knowledge, where human beings were at the center of the knowledge system rather than God. And that is one of the basic features of the Renaissance. So the knowledge system, of course, this knowledge system therefore is very closely connected with the study of the past, the Greco-Roman past. Though the term history was not as popular as it is now, so that kind of interest in finding out old artifacts, reading old texts, learning classical languages, etc., this we call antiquarianism. There is some kind of interest in the antiquity. And from antiquarianism, there is interest in various domains of knowledge which flourished in ancient Greece and Rome, like literature, primarily theater. Then there is philosophy, history, and such other disciplines. So these disciplines were being studied in a human-centric way rather than God-centric way. And therefore, these disciplines, or the ideology which governed the study of this discipline during the Renaissance period, was known as humanism. So these are studies of human conditions. And that is the origin of the categorization of humanities. These disciplines we are calling humanities. So this is starting from the Renaissance. And after the Renaissance, there are some other intellectual movements where we can see that there is the Reformation, when it is being pointed out by Martin Luther and others that the scriptures can be challenged, or at least the religious authority can be challenged. So there can be different interpretations even of the scripture. Then one major point in our discussion, as we are trying to find out the difference between the research in natural science and the research in humanities and social sciences, that is the scientific revolution. So scientific revolution is a big revolution which happened again in many phases. It started with what is known as the Copernican revolution, when Nicholas Copernicus pointed out that the universe is not geocentric, it's heliocentric. Of course, Copernicus was thinking in terms of universe, but it is not universe, it is the solar system. Universe is a much larger concept. And there are other researchers after Copernicus, like the Keplerian revolution, when Kepler modified Copernicus's model, and Galilean revolution, when Galileo, with his newly built telescope, started giving some kind of hard proofs to show that Copernicus was right. So what is basically there? Before that, in the biblical knowledge system, there was a concept of a geocentric universe, where the Earth is at the center of the universe, not only the solar system, the entire universe. And why is that? Why is that important? Because according to the Bible, God created the world in 6 days. God created all the creatures. And then God created human beings in his own model. So human beings are the greatest creation of God. That's why they are endowed with intelligence. They can think. And God created human beings, the first human couple, Adam and Eve, to serve God. It was not the original intention of God to send human beings to earth. Their original intention was to keep them at heaven in the Garden of Eden. Then all of you know that story, that the first human couple got misled by Satan and they got punished. They are sent to live on the earth. They are banished from heaven, etc. Now, that means human beings are endowed with intellect because they are created in God's own model and they can serve God. So everything God is doing, he's doing that with the human beings in mind. There is a communication between God and human beings. And where do the human beings live? They live on the earth. So of course, the earth is spatial. The earth has to be at the center of God's design, the universe. But when Copernicus pointed out that Earth is just another planet revolving around the sun, and Galileo proved it with some concrete hard proofs, the understanding of how the universe works started to change. And then coming down to the last phase of the scientific revolution. Scientific revolution started with Copernican revolution and ended with what is called the Newtonian synthesis. So there is this man, Isaac Newton, whom all of you have read about, at least in school, even if you are not a student of science. And what did Isaac Newton do? All of us know Newton because of his 3 laws of motion and of course his theory of gravity, which has been referred to in the previous lecture as well. So what did Newton do? He formulated some laws of motion. Newton created what we know as modern physics, a new discipline. And what does modern physics do? Physics is a discipline which gives some universal laws which explains how the universe works. So these are the laws, Newton's laws of motion, the law of gravity, and many other laws we learned about in our school science books. These are universal. Universality of the laws is a very important component of scientific knowledge, because what do we mean by universal? That even though we are naming some law by the name of the scientist who invented or discovered it, the law is not dependent on that particular scientist. It is not the personal opinion of that scientist. So the experiments which a scientist does and comes to a conclusion, if you do the same experiment, you will get the same conclusion. It is not a matter of that scientist's personal opinion and your personal opinion or my personal opinion. That's why in scientific research, universality is a very important point. That what is being claimed as scientific, that has to be universal. It should be objective. It is not subjective. It is not dependent on the personal opinion, location, political ideology, philosophy of the researcher himself or herself. So this is how modern science was being born, that there are universal laws which can explain how the universe works. And that is something which led to the Enlightenment movement when religion was secularized. As I was talking about the modern educational system, it is considered a secular educational system. Modern educational institutions are not supposed to be part of any religious establishment, even if some of them are, like we know there are famous schools and colleges run by Christian missionaries or the Ramakrishna Mission, etc. At least the knowledge they impart should not be based on scriptures. Religious knowledge is a different kind of knowledge. Religious now has its own domain, and secular knowledge has its own domain. Now, this is happening when the Enlightenment takes place in the 18th century. And we know there is a direct outcome of Enlightenment known as the Industrial Revolution, which is happening in early 19th century. So what is the Industrial Revolution? There is a massive technological development. And this technological development is, of course, a result of the scientific revolution, that with the laws of the new science, new technologies are being developed. And with this new technology, there are two advantages: much more advanced military infrastructure, advanced arms, weapons, and also much more advanced productive technology, industries. And as a result of that, improved weaponry as well as a much more rapidly advancing economy, Western Europe got an advantage over the rest of the world. We know this is the high period of European colonialism as well. And this modern educational system reached the other parts of the world, like Asia, like Africa, like Latin America, primarily through their colonial rulers. So modern educational system also came to these countries with colonialism. Now, of course, modern educational system has its benefits. We are all benefiting from that. But we have to keep in mind a limitation of colonialism. That is, at this point, Europe was leading the world, and there was a perception in Europe that why are they leading the world? Because of modern scientific and technological advancements. So Europe is more civilized than rest of the world, and this civilization, a greater hold on knowledge, comes through science, development in science. that created the notion of superiority of science over all other forms of knowledge. This is very different from what was happening during the Renaissance, when humanities were the most esteemed form of knowledge. In the post-scientific revolution, enlightenment, and industrial revolution world, in the 19th century and early 20th century world, scientific knowledge was considered the epitome of all knowledge. So these are all big changes in how we perceive knowledge. Once religion determined what is knowledge, what is research, then humanities were at the center stage for a brief period. Now, in the 19th and early 20th century, we have science determining what is true knowledge, what is true research. So there was a kind of research methodology developing at that time, and that kind of research methodology is extremely popular even now in countries like ours, because our educational system is still very much influenced by the colonial knowledge system. As a result of that, the kind of research methodology which was popular in 19th and 20th centuries still have a large hold on our academic institutions. So what is that? The privileging of science. Many of you, I'm addressing primarily the students, not the teachers present here, when you have passed your class 10 and you had to choose which stream you are going to choose for your further studies, you must have faced this situation where choosing the science disciplines was considered a much more respectable career option than choosing the humanities and social science disciplines. So this privileging of science, that is coming from this 19th, 20th century idea that science is true knowledge, science is power. And as we were discussing, by scientific knowledge, universal laws are meant. That true knowledge should be objective, universal, and it can be capsuled in particular laws. So even the social scientists of this period tried to create universal laws like the scientists. Like you might have heard about the great population theorist Malthus, who tried to give a universal law of how population works. The great economists of the time, particularly of England, like Adam Smith, Ricardo, they were trying to give laws about how the market works, how rent works. Many of you must have heard about the names of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels for their political theories, but their fundamental research was in the field of economics, and they were again trying to create some universal laws about how to understand the exploitation of labor, how profit is engineered in a capitalist society. Also, they tried to create certain laws about history. I shall come back to that. But this tendency of creating universal laws. So what scientific research does, the methodology of scientific research, first, data collection. You collect a huge amount of data, analyze them, and then you formulate the universal laws. These are the two steps of scientific research. And all of us, when we read the definition of science in our school textbooks, we heard that what is science? It is based on three principles. First, observation. You observe the object of your study. Then experimentation. You conduct experiments, and then you come to your conclusion. So either you approach science through these three steps, observation, experimentation, and conclusion, or through these two broader steps that you collect as much data as you can, and then you formulate universal laws. Now, the problem of social science research in this method, particularly historical research, if I ask you a question that what do you understand by history? There can be various answers, but the most common answer would be the study of the past. That in history, we are trying to study the past. Or even if you are from any other social science discipline, as we were discussing, when you try to create a historical context, you look at the past. Now, what is the past? Past is something which has already happened. So these three tools of scientific knowledge, observation, you decide I have to go back to 500 years earlier and observe what is happening and come back and conduct my research. That is not possible. Then experimentation, that you take the past in a laboratory and experiment with it. You cannot do that. So you cannot come to a conclusion also through observation and experiment. So similarly, you cannot formulate a universal law in social science or humanities or history. Some social science disciplines, like economics, as we discussed, give some tentative laws, but even they are not exceptions. If you have studied economics, you know all laws are given a huge list of preconditions that given all these preconditions, this may happen. Still, economics doesn't say that this is bound to happen. And other disciplines like history, political science, sociology, they cannot definitely say that this has happened in this human condition. So if this condition repeats, this is bound to happen. There is no possibility of formulating a universal law. So the methods of experimentation, data collection, data analysis, which we heard in the previous lecture, these methods are a bit different for social science research. But this sense of difference has come through a long evolution of knowledge system. Initially, as I am talking about the 19th and 20th centuries, then there was a very popular philosophy known as positivism. Positivism was a philosophy which argued that scientific knowledge is the only form of knowledge. And the great philosophers of the time in universities like Oxford and Cambridge, like Bertrand Russell, Cook Wilson, they tried to argue that any knowledge to be considered knowledge has to be scientific. So that was threatening for the humanities disciplines, particularly history, which are there in the universities right from the time of the Renaissance. How do they make their disciplines scientific? How do we conduct research in a scientific methodology? There were many practitioners of these disciplines who actually tried doing that. So these historians are known as the positivist historians, and the most important among them would be Leopold von Ranke, a German positivist historian who tried to analyze how history could be approached scientifically. So what Ranke said, that science is doing two things. First, collecting as much data as possible. Then the second, formulating universal laws. Ranke argued that the second cannot be done by the historians. The historians cannot formulate universal laws, but they can can collect data. They can accumulate as much data as possible. So if you are trying to study the past, the job of the historian is to collect as much material as possible. How is that to be done? Ranke gave these two fundamental ideas of social science research. One is known as the idea of archive, the other is known as the idea of referencing, both of which are still extremely crucial in social science research. So first you have to identify your archive. By archive, Ranke meant physically what we know as the archive, the building where government records are kept, of course. So Ranke meant that the historian has to physically visit the archive, look at all the materials, collect as much data as possible. And this data collection can be done by any historian because you are just copying what you are getting in the archival record. Your own subjective position is immaterial. So this is a scientific approach to history. So the positivist history writing did not care about the personal opinions of the historians. The historians were strictly forbidden from expressing their own viewpoints. They were supposed to collect as much data as possible. And the more data you gather, the better picture of the past you get. That was Ranke's idea. But of course, you have to prove that what you are saying is coming from the archival record. It is not your own opinion or imagination. So referencing is the other method Ranke focused on. That when you look at a historical or any kind of social science research, you see that there are references, maybe in form of footnotes or in form of endnotes or in-text citation, something, but there are citations, there are references. Because you have this responsibility towards your reader to show that you are not giving your own arbitrary opinion. You are finding the information in some valid source material. And secondly, as I discussed, that social scientists are writing also for the public, not only for their peer. So anybody, if they're interested, they want to cross-check your material, they should be able to do that if you do your referencing properly. So these were two methods Ranke spoke about. Now we don't believe that social sciences can be studied like a natural science. Why? I'll come to that now. But these two contributions of positivists still remain in social science research. That in any research, you have to have an idea what sources you are using, what is your archive, and then you have to be conscientious in your referencing. But we are not still bound by the framework of positivist understanding. Why? Now, as I discussed, positivism was popular in 19th century Europe. I have already referred to Marx and Engels. Together, they created a new philosophy called Marxism that is also in 19th century Europe, in the same country where Ranke was working, Germany. And in the middle of 19th century, sometimes Marx alone, sometimes Engels alone, and sometimes Marx and Engels together came up with a huge amount of writing on economy, on society, and on history, which was giving rise to a new philosophy. Now, I'll not go into the political dynamics of the Marxist philosophy, but I'll try to connect how it is connected with the theory of history. The basic crux of the Marxist ideology was they wanted to look at the world as a material world. So in German philosophy, for a long time, ideas were of primal importance. There were the philosophers known as the idealist philosophers, like Immanuel Kant, like Hegel, who would argue that human society changes with change of ideas. And Hegel brought a method called dialectics to the study of ideas. He thought that every society has some governing principles, dominant ideas, which he called thesis, and there are ideas opposed to that, which he calls antithesis. There is a constant interaction between the two, and by the intermixture of the two, new idea is created, which is synthesis. But now the synthesis becomes the thesis of the new society, and it has again another antithesis, and that's how society evolves. Marx also followed this methodology of dialectics, but Marx said that ideas are superfluous. Material human condition is what governs the evolution of human society. So this is the materialist analysis of the world. Marx argued material condition, that is how production is done. That is forces of production and production relations. That is man-to-man relation, driving force of always a production relation. And this one kind of production relation, which he calls a mode of production, the combination of production force and production relation. So one mode of production is the thesis. There are forces opposed to that, which is the antithesis. And by their constant clashes, a new mode of production is to emerge, which is better than the previous mode of production. And this continuous evolution takes place. So that is how Marx and Engels approached history. Engels, in his famous book, Origin of Family, Private Property and State, argues that initially human society was a communal society. There was no private ownership of things. So there was no difference between who has more property and who has less property. But for certain conditions, these three institutions emerged together. First, family. Then for the privacy of family, every family unit needs a home. So the idea of private property is coming. And with the coming of private property, there is a difference between who has more property and who has less property. And to maintain the property equilibrium, that one does not snatches away another person's property, there is the state. So the state society is a class divided society. And taking cue from this research of Engels, Marx argues that the history of all hitherto existing societies is history of class struggle. So Marx says that in production relation, every class divided society has many classes, but two prominent classes, the haves and the have-nots. The haves are the ones who own the means of production and who decide how the produced product is to be distributed, whereas the have-nots are the ones who mainly give the labor for the production. So this is the materialistic application of dialectics. So in Marxist philosophy, it's called dialectic materialism. And according to this principle, when historical evolution of human society is analyzed, it is called historical materialism in Marxist analysis. And what is historical materialism? Marx and Engels are arguing that human society has gone through these three class divided societies. First, the slave society, where slave owners were the property owners, haves, and the slaves were the producers who had no right over anything, including their own body, own person. Then the slave society changes, a better society called the feudal society comes up, where feudal lords own the main means of production, that is land, and serfs who are tied to the land of the feudal lord, who are bound to work for the feudal lord. They are the producers. It's a better society than the slave society, because the feudal lord does not own the person or the body of the serf. He only owns the labor of the serf, and on return, the serf also has some kind of property, at least a plot of land. The serf is also getting. But then again, there is class struggle and a change, and comes the capitalist society where Marx and Engels are writing, the industrial society of the West, where agriculture is superseded by industries, big, heavy industries. So the bourgeois class or the propertied class who own the industries, they are the haves, and the workers who work in the industries, they are the laboring class, they are the non-propertied class, the proletariat. Interestingly, Marx uses the word proletariat, which means who does not own anything, because in the industrial society, the laborer can be anybody. It is not that Marx meant every laborer is a poor, downtrodden person. Starting from the poorest of laborers working in a small town factory to the highly rich employee of Google or Apple who draws a salary in billions, all of them would be considered part of the working class by the basic definition: who owns the means of production and the right to distribute the produced good. So even the richest paid employee of Google or Apple does not own the company or anything, any infrastructural thing of the company. They sell their labor and get their wage. And that is the structure of the capitalist society. So one might argue that how is this a better society than the feudal society? Because in the feudal society, at least the serf had a plot of land. In the capitalist society, the laborer does not own anything in the place where he or she labors. But the answer to this is considered a better society because there is fluidity, mobility, which was not there in slave society or feudal society. A slave could not be a slave owner. A serf could not be a feudal lord. But here there is an element of choice. The laborer is not tied to any industry. They can choose, they can negotiate. As a result of that, also, though they don't own any property, on return of their labor, they get a wage. And since wage comes in monetary form, this can also become capital. So even the poorest of laborer can save some money and invest it in somewhere else. And the moment one invests, like I was saying that right from the poorest laborer to the richest paid engineer or management worker, all of them are laborers, true. But the difference is the richer section of the laboring class are also investors in somewhere else. They may be laborers in their own industries, but they can be the property owner in some other sector. That mobility is allowed by the capitalist society, so it's a better society than the feudal society. Then Marx and Engels predicted that there will be the socialist society, where there would be again a change when the proletariat will be the dominant class. So this is also a class divided society, but this is better than the previous because the proletariat are more numerous. So this would be the tyranny of the majority rather than tyranny of the minority. And then gradually the need of class difference will be eradicated. There will be a stateless, classless society. This is how Marx and Engels are doing. They are presenting their idea of history. There is one major flaw. There are certain flaws which have been pointed out. One major flaw, which none of you must do when doing historical research, which Marx and Engels did, is make your research teleological. Because history or social science, as we said, there is a commitment to the archive, to the source material. You cannot make a claim which is not there in your source. When Marx and Engels are predicting the future, that there would be a socialist society followed by a classless stateless society, that is not a scientific position. That is not a historically valid position also. You cannot predict the future. Earlier, when knowledge system was controlled by religions, teleology was a part of knowledge system. Religions predict that there will be a judgment day, or Kalki or Maitreya will come in future. So though Marx and Engels, they are also men from 19th century Europe, they are hugely influenced by positivism. They thought all knowledge is scientific. That's why they differentiated themselves from other socialists, claiming that other socialists are utopian socialists, where Marxism is called scientific socialism. So like the positivists, they were trying to give a scientific analysis of human condition, but they fell to the trap of teleology. The other major drawback in the Marxist analysis, again, because of the influence of positivism, they wanted to be universal. So this analysis of history, slave society to feudal society to capitalist society, this is very much accurate as an analysis of the history of Western Europe. You had the slave economy in Greece and Rome, or at least in an economy where slaves were a big component. You had feudalism in medieval Europe. You had the industrial society in Marx and Engels' contemporary Europe. But this model is not universally applicable. Now we know that in many Asiatic and African and Latin American civilizations, history did not follow this particular trajectory. Of course, Marx later realized that, and with the European chauvinism which was there in the knowledge system at that time, he spoke about Asiatic mode of production being a static mode of production where history did not even start. It is stuck at the same point. So when it will become a developed historical society, all these phases would come and so on. But anyway, we know from historical material that human history did not follow the same trajectory everywhere. But I am not going into these elements. These are, of course, the limitations of Marxism, which are pointed out by various scholars. But there is one contribution of Marxism in historical research, which was developed in a much more full-fledged critique by later schools, not by Marxism. That is, when Marx is saying about a class-divided society, there are haves and have-nots. And Marx is saying you have to understand the process of the changes in the mode of production, the process of class struggle. Now, think of positivist writing of history, that historian has to go to the archive, collect all the information and present that without any personal intervention. So Ranke and the positivists thought that whatever there is in the archive is objective truth, objective fact, the very idea of fact. So the archive is objective and the archive is storehouse of fact. What Marx pointed out, what is the archive? The records which are preserved by the state. And what is the state? State is the tool of the powerful. So if the society is class divided, the records preserved in the archive is the record preserved by those in power. Those records are created and preserved by a particular ideology. And if you have to understand the condition of the have-nots as well, you cannot literally follow what you are getting in the archive. You have to read between the lines. So there is a class character of the archival material. This was an important critique indicated by the Marxists, that the archival material is not sacrosanct. Now, of course, they were thinking only in terms of class, but that is something that becomes something important when we have a more broad-based idea of the archive, which developed only around the third, fourth decade of the 20th century. And now I am coming to this point of social sciences, how this idea developed from simple humanities, that it is around the middle of the 20th century. At that time, many practitioners of humanities started to question the very need of historical studies. Why do you need to study history? If you don't study history, what is the problem? Because they were raising this pertinent question that your knowledge must have some practical purpose. Like the economist would draw the policies of different firms and companies, or the budget, national budget of a state. Economics has this practical purpose. You study political science to understand politics. But why do you need to memorize all those information which comes from archive in the name of history? If you didn't know that who was the Nawab of Bengal when the Battle of Plassey happened, how would your life change? Is this knowledge contributing anything to your practical life? It is not. So this was a pertinent question, that why do you need to study history? And the scholars who tried to answer this question were two great French historians known as Marc Bloch and Lucie Favre, who edited a journal called Annals. So the group they led was known as the Annals School of History. And the Annals School actually changed our understanding of humanities research. Annals School gave two new ideas known as total history and global history. And in the argument about total history, the Annals School introduced, or even if not introduced, they focused on this very idea of social sciences rather than humanities. So they compared the study of society with the study of the natural sciences. We know that in natural sciences also there are various disciplines. There are core disciplines like physics, chemistry, biology, and mathematics. Now, of course, these are different disciplines. But can a physicist say that I study only physics, so I have no interest in learning what is happening in mathematics? Physics is impossible without maths. And similarly, a chemist cannot say that I have no interest in physics, because a large component of chemistry is dependent on the understandings of physics. And similarly, a biologist cannot avoid chemistry because it is primarily chemicals which are operating in human and animal bodies. So the separation of various disciplines is for convenience. You focus on one domain of study, but they are not divorced from each other. So if you have to understand how nature works, you have to have basic idea of all these, and they are feeding into each other. So similarly, what are the humanities disciplines trying? They are trying to understand the human condition, the human life, human society. So they cannot say that every discipline is different. An economist would not be interested in sociology, or a sociologist would not know politics, or a political scientist should not have any historical knowledge, or a historian would not have an idea of archaeology. That's not how this. So they boils that social sciences, like natural sciences are natural sciences which are studying the nature, social sciences are studying the society. And so they spoke of total history, totality of social sciences. That is, all these disciplines are supposed to feed into each other. So an economist can draw an economic policy when the economist understands the political condition where she is operating in, when she understands the evolution of various economic ideas historically. So all this knowledge the economist must possess. Similarly, a political scientist must have a consciousness of history. Otherwise, it is impossible to understand the political ramifications. And a historian also has to have understanding of polity, economy, society, and various other aspects. Similarly, the domain of history got expanded. And that's how what I started with, that whatever discipline you are pursuing has to be approached historically, because for positivist historians, history was only political narrative, because they were collecting only documents from the archive. So the dates and events of political history, which rulers followed whom, which battle took place when, that is how our basic school level understanding of history still works in many places. So history is about names and dates and political events. The Marxists first gave a critique that there is an economic aspect of history. But the Annals School expanded the view of history, that history is basically the study of human condition. So your idea of archive has to be expanded. Archive is not only a few documents stacked in a building preserved by the government. Archive can be anything. It can be letters exchanged between people. It can be someone's personal diary. It can be a literary text. It can be an art object. It can be archaeological material. It can be even ideas, anything. So with the Annals School, we started getting many new kinds of history, apart from political and economic history, like social history, cultural history, history of art, history of sports, even history of ideas, and what is popularly known as emotional history, how different emotions were perceived differently in different civilizations. Like we know, if we think about the very basic emotion of love, that there are researches by annals historians about the ideas of chivalry and courtly romance, which was the model of love in feudal Europe. That is not the model of love in Victorian England. That is not the model of love in our contemporary society. So there can be history of emotions or ideas as well. And so any aspect of society you are approaching in social science research, you need to understand the historical context. That is the point I was trying to make. And with the coming of Annals School and the idea of total history, that is the totality of social sciences, interdisciplinarity, and also global history, that history we might have studied in a very narrowed, compartmentalized way, that Indian history, European history, Chinese history, etc. But actually history is a global process. When the Annals School brought different kind of archives in action, like environmental history, Fernand Braudel, the most famous of the Annals historians, is famous for writing a history of the Mediterranean world, its environmental and climatic history, as well as the history of human interaction, trade, cultural interaction, and political movements in the Mediterranean. So this is not limited to the history of a particular politically defined country. This is interconnected history. So these are the new perceptions which came. I thought of discussing 4 major points in the development of social science research: positivism, Marxism, the Annals School, and I'll conclude with postmodernism and the challenges postmodernism brought. So this is the last point I'm going to discuss, and then I shall end. So this is another movement which also came from Europe, particularly France, again in the second half of the 20th century, 1960s, 1970s. And this brought another major shift in how we approach humanities and social sciences. So the movement is known as postmodernism. And from the very terminology, we can understand what they are trying to do. They are trying to go beyond the modern. What is that? We started our discussion with the notion of modern education system, the coming of modernity. And we discussed how modernity was the outcome of a series of intellectual movements from the Renaissance to the Enlightenment. And when we have our basic understanding of history, we know that history is broadly divided in these 3 periods: ancient, medieval, and modern. If we ask someone, what are these periodizations? What is the ancient period for India or for Europe? There is an answer. What is the medieval period for India, for Europe? There is an answer. This is the starting point. This is the ending point. What is the modern period? What is the starting point? There is an answer. That maybe the Enlightenment is, or the Renaissance is the starting point of modernity in Europe. In India, someone may say that with the coming of colonial rule, we are saying that the modern period is starting. Where does the modern period end? There is no answer. We think we are still living in the modern period. Now, the 18th century people thought they are living in the modern period. The 19th century people thought. Now in the 21st century, we are thinking that. And the common perception is it will go on. So this is an endless period we are inhabiting. But is that a historically accurate approach? If the ancient period, the medieval period began and ended at some point, and modernity, if we think that modern period is not supposed to end, that means we are thinking that we have reached the end of history. But did we reach the end of history? History is a study of change. Has human society stopped changing? Definitely not. Rather, the pace of change in our own time is drastic. The world we were born in, we are in our 30s, and the world we were born in and the world we are living in are drastically different. We could not think about something like mobile phone or internet connection or say ChatGPT when we were 9 or 10 years old. So if someone told us about such technologies, we would call that science fiction, not a reality. But in our lifetime, in 2 decades, such a drastic change has taken place. So of course, history has not ended. Then there is a need to look at modernity also as a historical moment, which had begun and which might have ended. So when did it begin? In this process from Renaissance to Enlightenment in Western Europe, there were certain features which were associated with modernity, and we tend to consider them as a progress. So we always use the term medieval barbarity, that the medieval is barbarous and the modern is developed. But then is there no further scope of development? It is not. So what the postmodernists tried to do, they tried to look at modernity, that is the outcome of the Enlightenment, also as a historical moment, and look at that moment critically as a historical moment with pros and cons, like any other historical epoch, rather than the end of history where there is no room for improvement. And in doing so, there is a wrong notion that postmodernists are trying to say that there is everything is bad about modernity. We discard everything about modernity. They are not doing that. They are trying to critically analyze, evaluate modernity, rather than going into the value judgment of modern being better than medieval. So, like, since I'm talking about history, of course, postmodernists contributed to various disciplines. But in case of history, Michel Foucault is a landmark postmodernist scholar who tried to inspect the Enlightenment values, like one of his famous books, Archaeology of Knowledge, where he tried to show that knowledge can be excavated. There are layers of the evolution of knowledge. Similarly, one of his early works, Discipline and Punish, if I use just one example, where Foucault showed, because I'm using this example because I just spoke about medieval barbarity. So it is in terms of disciplining and punishment, this term is used more frequent. That in medieval period, punishments were draconian, they were physical and brutal. There would be corporal punishment, public flogging and such things, which is barbarous, and disciplining and punishing has become more human, more civilized in the modern period. But as Foucault shows, that if we dilute what Foucault argued and try to give simplified examples, suppose someone has stolen something. In the medieval period, what would be the punishment of that person? Maybe 20 strikes, 20 strikes of the lash. And in the modern period, maybe that person would be sent to the prison for a year or two. Now think of this, the medieval punishment of 20 strokes, how would that affect the thief? He would physically feel the pain. Maybe he would be unwell for a week or two. Then he will resume his normal life. He would be able to support his family in need. He would be part of the mainstream society. What happens when someone is sentenced to prison for a year or two? The person is cut off from the society. The person cannot contribute to any need of his or her family. And when that person comes out of prison, there is a stigma attached with that person. So also the person rejoining the mainstream economic life is delayed and hard. So whether the medieval punishment is necessarily more cruel to the person who is being punished is a matter of question. Now, Foucault is not arguing that medieval systems were better than the modern systems. It is not a matter of better or worse. It's a matter of historical context, as I was saying, that you have to make your research contextualized. That in the medieval state, when monarchy is the prevalent system and there is a feudal order, so there is a pyramidal hierarchy, the monarch has to rule by a paraphernalia of fear. You have to strike fear or awe in the mind of your subjects. So this public corporal punishments, the display, creates this effect, which keeps the monarchical ideology going. In the modern society, where democracy is the norm, there is no such need of creating fear, at least in democratic systems. Other systems create fear, like fascism works on creating fear. But in democratic
So
systems...
you have 5 more minutes more.
Yes, yes. Not
Yes.
more
Yeah, if you could summarize. Okay.
Yes, I'm in my last segment. So, yeah, in the modern society, what happens? The person is sent to prison. And what does a person do in the prison? The person works, labors for the state, and the person is paid a nominal wage. But if they were not prisoners, what would have happened? These works of the state had to be done by hired laborers who would be paid a much larger wage. So this is the industrial capitalist society where labor is at premium. So the prisoner is much more useful as cheap labor. Whereas in the medieval society, keeping a person in prison and feeding him out of the exchequer would be a waste of the resource. Creating terror is a much more feasible form of punishment. So the notions of modernity are not ahistorical. They are not end of history. They also have to be historically contextualized. That is what Foucault and other postmodernists were arguing. And going by that argument, if we look at how history shapes up as a discipline, now there are some postmodernists known as narrativists who would argue from that angle, who would most boldly challenge the positivist system of relying on the archive, that they would say that history cannot be objective. History cannot, or any social science for that matter, cannot be an objective scientific study. Why? What you are using, the resource, the source material, that is not objective. That is produced by someone. That is preserved by someone. So whatever period you are studying, you don't get all the materials. Some have been preserved, some have been destroyed. And that is a conscious selection made by those in power. Also, the ones which have been preserved, they are created by human beings. They are not machine made. So those human beings had their own subjective positions, which are reflected in the documents. Then you select your research question. And here I am coming to how to approach our modern social science research, that which questions are pertinent, what should be your theme of research. In humanities and social sciences, it is a very personal question. That's why 200 years back, nobody would try to write a history of the transgender community. Now one would, because that is a social consciousness which has been created. Nobody would write Dalit history even 100 years back. Now people would, because of the Dalit movement. So your research questions are coming from your own social location. It is again not objective. It is a subjective question. So in scientific research, the more pertinent thing is which research is more needed, which technology is more needed, which domain needs more exploring. In social science research, it is more about your subjective inclination, that which subject appeals to you more, which subject attracts your intellect more, which answers you are seeking. It is a very much subjective decision. And when you have taken this subjective decision, you have chosen your source materials. Again, you are not actually producing everything that is there in the sources. You are selecting materials for your for presenting them in your own writing, and your own writing has a structure. In social science research particularly, this structure is important. This structure is called narrative structure. So the structure has a beginning, a middle, an end. You are introducing your research topic, you are discussing your material, and you are coming to a conclusion. This is the narrative structure. And that's why narrativists should say in social science and humanities, the narrative matters more than the content of your research. There was one great literary scholar, Northrop Frye, who would say that novels, prose literature primarily, not only prose literature, creative literature can be divided in four major genres: tragedy, comedy, romance, and irony. Now, Hayden White, one major postmodernist scholar, would argue that social sciences and history are also primarily narratives. So don't try to write an authentic history. Try to write a better narrative. Historians have mostly tried to write comedies or romances. Write ironically. That would make it a better history. That is one approach. W.B. Galley wrote a famous article called What is a Story? And if you think of this question, what is a story? Story is basically this narrative structure. When we read a story, it has this narrative structure. The beginning, the story is introduced. Then there are some events in the story, the middle, and a conclusion of the story. So this structure of beginning, middle, and end tells us a story. Galley says that that's what humanities researchers also do. They try to tell us a story. So it is not important whether you made a better research. It is more important whether you have told a better story. Would everyone agree with this position? Even not all postmodernists agree with that. That's why narrativists are a separate position within the postmodernists. Why not? I'll conclude with that. But as I said, even after all these movements, we cannot discard some elements of the positivist position, that you have to select your archive, you have to use references in your works. Similarly, the narrativist position is important. When you are doing social science research, you must have a story to tell. You must have a narrative structure in your mind, what I am going to say, and it has to be readable. It has to be, or at least even if I can't say it has to be, if it is more enjoyable reading, it is supposed to get more following. But that doesn't actually mean that every social science research is only telling a story. That is an extreme position which Galli or Hayden White takes. There is a different position, there is this scholar Leon Goldstein who wrote a famous book called Historical Knowing, which is a very interesting book, where he pointed out what is thinking historically. When you contextualize your research historically, what do? You just create a story out of nothing? That is not the thing, because that positivist legacy of referencing, staying true to your sources, that still remains. So a story writer has the freedom of writing anything out of imagination. A researcher does not have the freedom to write anything out of imagination. The researcher has the freedom of subjective opinion. There can be different interpretations of same history, unlike in natural sciences. But all these different interpretations has to be based on some kind of source material. It cannot be just a matter of the researcher's fancy or imagination or inclination. So what does the researcher do about the past? Goldstein says that there are two pasts. One is the real past, the other is the historical past. The real past is the past that happened. And as we discussed, that is gone. We can never go back to the past. We can never construct the past again. So the work of social science research is not constructing something, unlike scientific research. What we do is reconstructing something. And the reconstruction would never be identical. That's why there would be differences of opinion. So you need not worry that someone else has worked on this field, so this field is exhausted. No. As in the previous lecture we heard, you cannot rediscover the law of gravity, that Newton saw an apple fall and I am saying oranges also follow the law of gravity. That is not a good research in natural sciences. In humanities, if you can bring a different perspective based on valid source materials on the same topic, your field is not exhausted. If you have something original to say, if you can use the source materials creatively, that is the most important aspect in humanities research. So all the reconstructions are historical past is a partial reconstruction of the real past on the basis of the evidences, the source materials available to us. Historical past tries to approximate the real past, but it is not identical. So a better research is basically the one which approaches the real past better. And how do we judge that? By the use of the material, not by which story is better to read. You can compare that with solving a puzzle, with the puzzles we played with, or building blocks. Now, think of a puzzle with some pieces missing. You cannot get the full picture. But of course, the better solved puzzle would be the one which approached the intended structure better. So at least you have to understand which pieces are fitting with which pieces. That is being true to your source. That is the difference between storytelling or artistic creativity and humanities and social science research. So what we can conclude, humanities research has its own methodology. Humanities research or historical research is not a science, but it is not a pure art also. It has its own separate methodology, which is different from science, which is different from pure creative activity. That is something we need to keep in mind. And so we can be both true to the sources as well as intuitive, creative, interpretative in our own research. I think I should stop here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sinha. Lots to take home from here. I wish we could discuss this in great detail, but we are running short of time. So in case you have questions, please very quickly put them in the chat box. We probably have time to take 2 or 3 questions at this point. Thank you so much for being with us. We have the first one here from one of my colleagues, Professor Taposh Roy. How is life history included as a source in historical research in the present era of digitalization? And how will AI tools like ChatGPT influence historical research in times to come?
I think there is some problem in the connection.
Can you hear us, Pranata?
Yes, I can. Yeah. I
Yeah.
can.
Yeah. So the
Am I
question,
audible?
yes, you're audible. Yes. The question is on very interesting on how AI tools like ChatGPT will influence historical research because archives, so archival sources depend on written documents. That's the first. That's the second part of the question. The first part is how is life history included as a source in historical research in today's era of digitalization?
Yes. So to answer very quickly, yeah, as I said, that the idea of archive is ever expanding. So digitization has brought a new range of sources as archival sources. Now there is something about the digital sources also. I'll come back to that after answering the second part of the question because these are connected. So for instance, ChatGPT. And that is where what I was discussing becomes crucial. That had our understanding of historical research been it was in the 19th and 20th centuries, that it is mere collection of data, then actually there would not have been any need of human researchers with ChatGPT and AI coming up like that. But as I discussed, there is this aspect of human intuition, human interpretation, the subjective positioning, which is also very important in humanities and social science research. And till now, artificial intelligence is not supposed to be able to do that. Though the artificial intelligence may seem capable of doing that, because in many cases, like a few days back, I was reading an article where we saw that, like ChatGPT, there are some chatbots called Bhagavad Gita chatbots. The chatbots are playing Krishna, so you as Arjun can ask the chatbot any question about your life, and it will give answer to according to the framework of the Gita. Now, most questions are about life lessons, but someone experimentally asked the question that what is your opinion about Elon Musk? And the ChatGPT answers that as a Krishna, I don't comment on individuals. We are trying to address universal questions. So let us not ask questions on individuals. Then again, this question was asked, what is your opinion on Narendra Modi? And the chatbots are unanimously saying he's a great leader taking India forward. And so you should always support Narendra Modi. Now, this is, of course, not the chatbot's position. Whatever artificial intelligence we are talking about, the data it works on is a feed, which is created by some humans. So they may seem like having a subjective position, but after all, artificial intelligence cannot have a subjective position. But subjective positioning in asking research questions, in selecting the material, in arranging them and presenting them, in all these stages, human intervention is very much important. So I think that's why only the sources of the archival documents are not enough right now for having a comprehensive idea of our society. And for the same reason, the digital sources, like few years back, even 2-3 years back, digital sources would be considered much more authentic, like a photograph, a video, are much more concrete sources. But with the coming of AI, now we know that there can be images of people in part. The images can be created with AI. So that particular person might not have been present right there, but the image is created. And these innovations are going on. So that's why, again, a discerning human mind might be more and more needed in future research in analyzing, in separating one kind of source from another, because with digitization more resources have come up, but more fake sources of knowledge have also come up. So that is where also the role of the human intellect can be very important.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can I
Shilantana,
question
yes.
one?
Yes, Shilantana.
I have only just one question. In the domain of social sciences, data collection is a must. Okay. And these data are to be collected from secondary sources, that is texts, to be more precise, books. Okay. And there are primary sources as well. For example, archaeological sources, particularly in the field of ancient Indian history. So if we want to go for research in ancient history, what are the, can you highlight on some other materials besides archaeological or monographs, etc., etc.? Can you highlight?
Actually, I would contradict from your position. No original research can be based on secondary sources. Whatever data collection, or if someone is working on a text or a textual culture, like suppose someone not in the field of history, in the field of literature, is working on crime fictions in Bengali literature, then those crime fictions become the primary source for that researcher. And the secondary source would be the works of other researchers who worked on the same domain. So primary sources are the, as I was saying, now archive, if we can use the term in an expanded sense, then primary source is the archive you are dealing with, your primary field of research. In case of ancient Indian history also, there are archaeological sources, there are literary sources. There is a misconception that archaeological sources are more authentic because those are more well-grounded, dateable, etc. But by archaeological sources, if we mean primarily excavated materials, after all, these are only objects. Objects can give us only insight about material condition. Like, suppose if we think of the Harappan civilization, all the information we know about the Harappan civilization is about its material condition. How was the town planning? How were the buildings? What they ate? What they wore, etc. If I am to ask someone, tell me some major incidents of the Harappan period, who were the rulers? Nobody can answer, because archaeological sources cannot answer them. So that's why human narratives are important. Though human narratives have the problem of subjectivity, bias, exaggeration, everything. And that's why you have to learn to corroborate one kind of source with other kind of source materials. But study of history is a study of combination of archaeological and literary sources. And those literary sources are primary sources, not secondary sources. So suppose you are doing a work on the Gupta period, then the texts composed in the Gupta period, they are literary texts, like the texts of Kalidas, for instance. They are primary sources. But the books written on the Guptas by modern historians, these are the secondary sources.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you so much. I'm sure you have more questions. I do. But in the interest of time, we have to bring a pause to the conversation here for today. But we hope to have Dr. Sinha over in person in our college once we reopen and we can continue the discussion. I would now like to invite my colleague and the convener of the seminar subcommittee, Professor Monali Poddar, to formally offer the vote of thanks.
We have come to the end of today's webinar. Now it's my turn to convey the vote of thanks. I would express my heartfelt thanks to our college authority for giving me this chance of conducting the webinar on research methodology. This is mainly aimed for the students having a penchant for research but not knowing how, when, and where to start. Our sincere thanks to Professor Ramlan Chakraborty for accepting our invitation and willing to share his valuable knowledge on the topic. Our thanks to Dr. Konad Sinha for sharing his marvelous work on ancient history and the ongoing research. Our thanks to our principal, Dr. Monturam Shamanto, our IQAC coordinator, Dr. Partho Dotto, both of whom insisted upon holding the webinar. Thanks also to our faculty members who have significantly uplifted our morale for holding such events all through. Our thanks to all the participants near and far who have joined with an encouraging spirits, and thanks to all our students who made their presence felt. A big thanks to all my seminar subcommittee team members for an excellent support. We would consider ourselves successful in our efforts if this webinar motivates at least few of our students present to pursue research. Hope to meet you soon tomorrow again for the webinar on intellectual property rights. Thank you and good night. Thank you. So we may leave the meeting today.